Now, another kind of immunity, in addition to humoral, is called cell-mediated immunity. And T cells play the central role in this kind of immunity. Okay, the previous one was the B cells. The T cells play a central role in cell-mediated immunity. And in this kind of immunity, there are several types of cells that are developed to target, destroy the antigens. And the cell-mediated immunity is activated when a macrophage, remember we talked about those earlier, they're kind of white blood cells that eat other organisms. And so when this macrophage starts to eat an antigen, the two together, the antigen and the macrophage, makes what we call an antigen macrophage complex. And what it will also do is it will stimulate a helper T cell. So these T cells have other cells that help them out. So in this diagram here we have the macrophage getting ready to eat an antigen. And so that's the macrophage, and that's the antigen. And then it will become, where you can see the antigen inside the macrophage, that will become the antigen macrophage complex. Now, the helper T cells will are going to be activated, and they're going to make more of these, and they're going to help out the macrophage as it seeks to eat and destroy the antigen. So those are the helper T cells that are helping out the macrophage. So helper T cells make more of the same kinds. In other words, they make more of each other. And they may also stimulate the plasma cells that we've already talked about before that came from the B cells to release their antibodies. So these helper T cells will stimulate the plasma cells to release their antibodies to help out. And then they'll stimulate other types of T cells that can form. One of the other kinds of T cells that are formed are called cytotoxic T cells. They're also called killer T cells. And cytotoxic T cells attack other body cells that have been affected by the antigen. Okay, so here is a body cell that's been attacked by an antigen and is being harmed by it. And these cytotoxic T cells will attack that damaged cell, and it will result in the lysis of the cell. Now, lysis just means, by itself, means to split. So what it's going to do is it's going to kind of like rupture the cell, and it's going to spill out its contents. Obviously, that cell now is going to die, but then it will render that cell unable to reproduce the antigen and prevent the antigen from multiplying itself. So here we have the antigen macrophage complex. We have the helper T cells, and these helper T cells will make other helper T cells. They'll also make these cytotoxic T cells. So they're kind of like a specialized T cell. These are the ones that will attack a body cell that's damaged by an antigen and cause it to split open, and by killing that cell, it prevents it from being controlled by the antigen to make more like viruses or something like that. Now we also have what are called suppressor T cells. These are the kind of T cells that are produced toward the end of a fight of an infection, and they stop the activities and get the body to go back to normal. In other words, this body is now in a heightened state of attack on its enemy, and then we need something to kind of, when the enemy has been defeated, to get the body to go back to, so these cells stop the activity of the killer T cells, the helper cells and the plasma cells, and they return the body kind of back to normal, like when you're starting to feel well. So here we have the T cells, or helper T cells, producing other helper T cells. They produce the toxic T cells, but then they also produce some T cells towards the end of an infection to kind of get the body to stop being in a defensive or an attack mode and get back to going back to. Now, in all of this, for many diseases, there are memory T cells that are made during the infection, and they will circulate in the body for dozens of years. So this is the one that gives you this long-term immunity to a particular antigen. And they're ready to divide when needed again. So in other words, if the body would be attacked by the same antigen again, they're ready to get to work immediately, as quickly as possible. So we have the helper T cells forming forming other helper T cells, forming cytotoxic T cells, suppressor T cells, and then they're the ones also who will make some of these T cells memory T cells that remember what this antigen was like, and get it ready to, in case that antigen should ever appear again. So that takes us to the end of today. Tomorrow we'll finish up this section on immunity. Now, today we want to talk about acquired immunity. This is the second part of our discussion about immunity. We've already talked about humoral immunity. We've talked about cell-mediated immunity, and we have left to talk about acquired immunity, and there's different kinds even of that. And acquired immunity is when someone suffers from a disease and the body manufactures memory B cells and memory T cells. Okay, so that's if you have acquired it by having actually had the disease. And when the proper antigen stimulates them, these cells quickly divide to produce antibodies and reactivate the processes of cell-mediated immunity. So acquired immunity, we have one kind of acquired immunity. This is where a person will manufacture the antibodies himself because he's actually, or he or she has actually had the disease and has activated the T cells for a particular antigen. So they produce antibodies or T cells for themselves. Now there's another kind of immunity that we call natural immunity, or active immunity is also another name for a natural immunity. This is the one where you naturally get over a disease and then you just don't ever get it again. So this actually, as I said, results from actually having had the disease. Then we have what are called is a kind of active immunity, but this is an artificial one where you didn't actually have the disease. This would be like, for instance, like if you were inoculated with a vaccine with an antigen that stimulates your body to produce antibodies and activates T cells, but the vaccine usually is just a weakened form of that pathogen. In other words, it's not strong enough to actually win the battle. Your body, it's just there to stimulate your body to develop an immunity to this. So it's produced by being exposed to this pathogen. And what they've done to this pathogen, they have exposed it to chemicals, acids, heat, x-rays. A passive immunity is one that a person can develop by being given antibodies that have been formed by another person or an animal. And this is one of the things that they are thinking about doing right now in COVID-19. People who have recovered from the disease, they're taking their antibodies and using that to treat, first of all, people that are quite sick, but it can be also serve as a passive immunity. Now, since the person didn't actually produce these antibodies themselves, this immunity is pretty short-lived. And a natural type of passive immunity would be one that mother gives to her baby, and the baby then, because during nursing and things like that, prevents the baby from being sick while they're in that newborn phase. Okay, and then we have artificial passive immunity. This is where the blood of the organism that has the immunity is used to make a serum, and then this serum is injected into a person, and it gives them only a few months, but maybe that's time where the dangerous nature of a particular disease, maybe it kind of dies down and there's fewer and fewer people that are infected by that. So so the artificial passive immunity uses a serum. And that takes us to the end of immunity.